Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Wiley Solution Walkthrough Accounting Tools for Business Decision Making. This is the 8th edition, and we're going to go today through problem 17-1. So over here, our authors are Paul Kimmel, Jerry Weingat, and Jill Mitchell. The question used in this presentation is copyright 2022 by John Wiley and Sons. All rights are reserved. This is for educational purposes only. The video may not be distributed or redistributed without the express permission of Wiley, but of course you can use it to put yourself to bed. Solution presentation, copyright 2022 by Bennett Tchaikovsky, all rights are reserved. The opinions contained within this presentation are those of Bennett Tchaikovsky and not the authors of the textbook or of Wiley. So before we thank the bus driver, let's kind of come right over here. So in problem 17-1, and when you're dealing with activity-based costing, and by the way, I apologize for the font on this. It's not my question. And it's, again, this is really, if you have the textbook, this is meant to help you kind of get through it. If you go to zlibrary.org, you can probably find it a couple different places. But when we're looking at these different types of questions, right, it's really about, we've got this overhead, and it's how do we go through and allocate it to different products. And what's really not going to change, and for this particular company, Combat Fire has a home model, and they also have a commercial model. And we know that for each one of these, parts, there's going to be direct materials, there's going to be direct labor. And the direct materials, it tells us, is basically on a per unit. So the direct materials cost per unit is $18.50 for the home, $26.50 for the commercial. The direct labor is $19 per unit for both the home and the commercial. Now, the one thing that we're not including, remember that going back over and looking at our T account, like what goes into our unit cost. Well, we know it's going to be direct materials. We know it's going to be direct labor. But we also know it's going to be factory overhead. And factory overhead, because if we're using applied overhead, it can be extremely subjective, right? So we've got over here, we've got the factory overhead. Now, why does this all kind of matter to us? And it's really because when we're looking at this, if our sales price per unit, say for the home model is, say, I don't know, we'll say it's like $80. And for the commercial unit, it will say it's going to be 100. Or I should maybe say it's 60, and then for the commercial, we'll say it's 100. The reason why this matters is because depending upon the allocation method that I use, I could all of a sudden take a product that is profitable, seemingly by one overhead allocation, and turn it into being unprofitable. And what I will always tell my students for this particular chapter, that the mindset that you kind of want to have in this is that if I'm going to be getting paid and my payment is based on a contingency, say, such as, well, if we achieve a certain amount of profitability, the question you really want to ask yourself is, well, how is that profitability being defined? And I've got some other videos that are out there about activity-based costing and the like, and you can kind of see it really kind of, my awareness of it really came around with Hollywood accounting, where you'll have a film like Return of the Jedi, which, well, first part is okay. Could have done without the Ewoks, but that's okay too. But episode 1, 2, and 3 kind of leaves us lingering for the good old episode 6. So when you're looking at those different things, is that, all of a sudden, let me pull up this article for you. So this is an article by Derek Thompson in The Atlantic, and it's basically how can a movie that grossed $475 million on a $32 million budget not turn a profit? And it comes down to accounting. And so you can go through, and if you kind of go through and look at these different, I'll leave the link to this in the video. Let's do that real quick. So if we kind of go down over here, you can kind of see something where it's like, yeah, well, we just made this thing lose money. So you have to kind of keep it in the back of your mind that if this is why this particular chapter is so important, is that you just want to kind of keep yourself, well, how is this being determined? And so if your compensation is being based on any type of job profitability, that's going to be a big concern. So in going through and looking at, we're going to be using activity-based costing today, but the other one that this goes through is basically a single plant-wide overhead. And let's just kind of, the question itself gives us the answer, but I want to kind of just show you how they're getting to that answer for the single plant-wide overhead. So over here, our estimated annual manufacturing overhead is $1,584,280. And the manufacturing overhead this is a more of a general breakdown of it. However, we don't, like, if we're going through and allocating using all of these different drivers, this may take, it's not going to be free. It's going to be a little bit more expensive to go through and to do it, to compile the data. But what's a much easier way to go through and do it is like, let's go ahead and just do this based on direct labor hours. Now, to go through and to figure out, well, how do we go through and figure out the number of direct labor hours that we need? Let's take a look at the question. So combat fire manufactures cylinders for the home and then for commercial. The home model, in terms of the units, it's going to be 54,000 units per year. Over here, the commercial models, low volume, 10,200 units. Both products require 1.5 hours of direct labor. So my direct labor hours per unit is going to be 1.5 and 1.5. Then what I need to go through over here and do, so my total direct labor hours over here for the home is going to be 54,000 times 1.5. This is going to be 10,200 times 1.5, or a total of 96,300 hours. And so when we kind of look at this, right, what we're now going to kind of go through and say is we're going to say, okay, here's our manufacturing overhead. Total direct labor hours is going to be 96,300. And so basically we've got over here on a per unit basis, or excuse me, per overhead per direct labor hour is going to be $16.45. And let me just correct this. Okay. So for every direct labor hour we spend, we're going to be allocating $16.45 to it. So if I go over here and say, okay, this is per unit, and if it's 1.5 direct labor hours per unit under single plant wide, my factory overhead right over here is going to be 1.5 times this 1645 or 2468. Over here, this is going to be 1.5 because this is how many direct labor hours per unit it takes times 1645, or again 2468. So my total costs using single plant wide is going to be here at $62.18 and then $70.18. Now, what's troubling potentially, and again, I just made up these sales prices to put it in here. What's potentially troubling about this is that if I just go with this allocation, am I in fact losing money, right? Because if we think about it, when we're going through and selling something, I've got my sales less my cost of goods sold, gives me disgusting profit, less SG&A is going to give me my operating income. So if I'm losing money, right, at the gross profit level, if I've got a loss, before I get to selling general and administrative, I've got to potentially have a problem, right? So this is why the methodology we choose is extremely important. Now, let's go ahead and take a look through this. So this is the results under single plant wide. And when we're looking over here, now we're going to be doing this under activity-based costing as well. When we're going through and doing this under activity-based costing, right? So my per unit, home, and commercial, right? The sales price that I made up, this is not changing, right? The direct material and the direct labor, these are not changing. But my factory overhead under ABC is more than likely going to be different because we're going to go through and see exactly how this works. So when you're in this chapter and you're going through and you're having to kind of go through and figure out, okay, what exactly am I doing here in just chapter 17, is you're basically trying to figure out, well, what is it that's going to be under activity-based costing? So let's go ahead and we're going to move this down. And this is my single plant wide. And let's now take a look at activity-based costing. So instead of just taking the total amount of the manufacturing overhead and dividing it by one driver, which is my direct labor hours, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to take a little bit more of an intricate look in terms of basically the different overhead costs. So over here, my cost pool. And again, I'm just going to be going through and kind of going through this over here. I've got receiving, forming, assembling, testing, painting, packaging, and shipping. Okay, so right over here, these are my cost pools. My estimated overhead is going to be 80,400, 150, 500, 412, 300, 51,000, 52,580, 837, 500, for a total of over here 154, 280. Right, this is much easier to do on Excel, which is why when I give this on exams, I'm trying to be doing this a little bit more on a limited basis. Okay, or a number of costs or drivers. Okay, so this is my overhead. Now, in terms of going through and allocating this, what I need to come up with is I need to go through and look at this. And this basically says pounds. So over here, our estimated use of cost drivers in terms of pounds is going to be 335,000 for receiving. For forming, it's going to be 35. And then this is what it's telling us over here, the use of the drivers by the product. So instead of going through and just using one driver, we're going and taking a little bit more of a micro view, and we're going to then basically come up with our cost per driver. We're then going to allocate it to home and commercial. So what we're going to do is in the aggregate is we're going to go ahead and basically allocate out the overhead to both home and commercial. So let's go through and do that first. So right over here, our driver. Basically, this is in okay, so this is in pounds, machine hours, number of parts, number of tests, gallons, and then pounds. Okay, so right over here, this is 335,000, 35,000, 217,000, 25,500, 52,000, 58. And then over here, this is going to be 335,000 again. Okay. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the overhead amount, which I'll call this A, and I'm going to divide it by the driver amount, which is going to be my rate per driver. Okay. And I'm not the best at spreadsheets. This is definitely a class you need to go through and take. So my rate per driver right over here is going to be 24 cents $4.30, $1.90, $2, $10, and then $2.50. Now, for the home, what I'm now going to do that I have now my rate per driver is I'm now going to basically go through and allocate it to the various different products. So over here, when I'm looking at my home driver amount, this is showing over here at 215,000. This is 27,000, 165,000, 15,500, 3680, and then 215,000. When I multiply this through, I'm going to get 51,600. So again, I'm taking 430, multiplying it by 27. Just follow the letters that are up here. And I'm going to come over here, and that is what I'm going to be going through and getting, right? So again, so where did I get 51.6 from? We'll use a smaller one over here, go back to 10. This is going to be 0.24 times 215,000. This is going to be 4.3 times 27,000. This is going to be 1.9 times 165,000. This is going to be 2 times 15,500. This is going to be 10 times 3680. And then this is going to be 2.50 times 215,000. Okay, so my total amount that I'm going to be allocating to the home module is going to be $1,086,000. Now, I could also just say, oh, well, that means that, that the overhead being allocated to the other one is going to be $497,780. Now, I just want to caution you is that, yeah, could you do that? Sure. But I always like to go through and to check our work. So we're now going to be looking at the commercial driver amount. And this is going to be 120,000, 8,000, 52, 10,000, 1578. And then this is going to be 120,000. Okay. And again, where did I get these numbers from? They're coming right from over here in the question. Okay. So over here, I've got my driver amount, and we'll call this letter F. C times F, excuse me, my rate per driver times F is going to be equal to my commercial allocation. Okay, so over here, this is going to be 24 cents times 120, $4.30 times 8, $1.90 times 52, $2 times 10, $10 times 1578, $2.50 times 120. So once I've gone through and I've allocated this out over here, I get 497,780, which is what we said it should be in the first place, right? But it's always good to go through and to check our work. So now this tells me the total amount of the overhead allocated. This is extremely important, right? So these two numbers have to equal the total amount of the overhead. But this tells us in the aggregate in terms of what is being allocated. I need to know for this question, what is it going to be on a per unit basis? So what I'm going to do is I need to come over here and say units. So my units produced over here of the home was 54,000. So my home units was 54,000. My commercial units is going to be 10,200. So what I need to do, because I need this to be done on a per unit basis, what I need to go through and do is to come over here and basically say, okay, if I'm taking 1,086,000 divided by 54,000, I'm coming up over here with $20.12 per unit. Over here, I'm coming up with $49 per unit. Okay, or $48.80. So my per unit for each of these, and where did this come from? This is 1,086,000 right? Where do these numbers come from, right? So again, how did I get to these numbers, right? This is going to be 1,086,500 divided by 54,000. This is going to be over here. This is going to be 497,780 divided by 10,200. Now, if I put these down over here into activity-based costing, right? I'm looking over here and I'm now seeing that, oh, well, what's fascinating about this as I'm going through is that my cost of goods sold for these different items have actually dropped. So when I thought that by using the single plant wide, right, which is just one cost driver, my commercial, and again, I just made up these sales prices. So my gross profit per unit, this here is going to be 60 less 62.18. This is going to be 100 minus 70.18. And what's kind of nuts is that after going through and doing activity-based costing, like what's really happened? Well, first off, my home sales, well, my home units are actually, they seem to be eking out a little bit of a profit. But my commercial, when I'm using activity-based costing, is much less than what I thought it was. So this is why using activity-based costing or different costing methods can try to give you a better true vision in terms of how in the manufacturing process that these different types of products will use overhead differently. So just keep that in mind as you're going through it. And again, hopefully you found this video to be helpful. Just give me a moment. So again, here is basically how they're going through and doing it. And they're basically coming up with the 2468. Over here, you're looking at, this is how they're going through and coming up with the rate. And then this is over here doing the allocation. So essentially what we've just kind of gone through and have done. When I go through and look at this in terms of whether it's value added or non-value added, I'm assuming what that means. I mean, if I didn't know what that means, I'd just go up and like look it up. But I guess non-value added is something that's more not directly related to the product, but it has more to deal with something like testing or receiving. And then over here, this is just more of a discussion of it. So hopefully you found this video helpful. I want to thank Wiley again for allowing me to do this. And the one thing I do want to say is, like, most publishers are extremely reticent to allow me to go through and make these types of videos. However, Wiley, I think, realizes because of Chegg, Course Hero, and some of these other websites that students have access to the answers. My philosophy has always been, as a student, you'll always get the answers to any questions that are in the book in my class. And that's just because I think it's easier to go through and to study that way. But when you're going through and when you look at this at the end of the day, their philosophy of wanting me to do or allow me to do these videos, to have them released out just because you're actually learning something by watching them, I honor them for that and I appreciate it. So in any event, have a great one. And if there's any other solutions you're looking for me to go through and do, just give a shout out and I'll do my best. Have a great one.